Before we get started, I just want to recognize the NASO team that we have. I want to recognize our advisor, Mariah Williams from the business department, right over here. Huge support. And then we have Rachel Beecher is a member. And then also Leslie Boss, way in the back, is our vice president. So we're going to have an open discussion basically about the film, and I will introduce our panel and by name, and then they will give a brief introduction of who they are and what they do. So first up, we have Mr. Lynn LaPointe.
Good evening. My name is Lynn LaPointe. I'll introduce myself from Lakota. My name is Wichach Pisapa. Sishanka Lakota Ate na Rosebud, South Dakota na Washloha na Standing Rock, North Dakota. My name is Lynn LaPointe. I have my grandfather's name, Black Star. I am from the Standing Rock Reservation and enrolled in the Rosebud Reservation of South Dakota.
Next, we have Dr. Dillon Carr from GRCC.
Probably can't have a conversation in America about cultural appropriation without inviting the white guy. So that's, I think, my role here. I'm professor of anthropology here at GRCC. My background is as an anthropological archaeologist, so a lot of my research focuses on the relationship between humans and environmental relationships, primarily in pre-contact North America. In addition, I've done oral history work with First Nations in Northern Ontario as a means of trying to better understand sort of indigenous lifeways and using it as a framework for thinking about the archaeological record. As sort of a professional consequence, I also teach courses on Native cultures and history at several institutions, including GRCC.
And from GVSU, Ms. Belinda Bardwell.
Buju, Nijo Kwe Indigenous, Waganak Singo Dawa, Nishnabe Kwe Indao, Mamek and Dodam, Lowell and Donjaba. So my English name is Lynn Bardwell. I come from Grand Rapids. I grew up here, but my family comes from Harbor Springs, the Little Traverse Bay Band. Currently, I live in Lowell. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Andre Fields. I'm a counselor here at GRCC. My research kind of centers around the impacts of American racism on the psychological functioning of society. So I think that's why I got invited.
That's precisely why.
As long as it's not to analyze me.
No. So I'd first like to just, as a lead question, just ask the panel your thoughts on this film. Anyone is free to start.
So some of you out there know me that I'll talk at any time I'm given. So my immediate thought was of the movie is actually I walked out because all of the things that were said in this movie I've heard 1,000 times before, and it's so I don't know if anyone in here still sits on the fence, whether it's derogatory or not, or racial or not. I find it hard to believe that there are some people that still find it not offensive. I totally get having a personal and emotional connection to a team, to a school, to a figure. I grew up in Grand Rapids. I grew up in my own safe little bubble. I didn't know that there was a Native community in Grand Rapids. My Native community was in Harbor Springs, and we saw them every weekend. So I grew up in this protective bubble. And one of my favorite teams growing up was Florida State University, the Seminoles. And I had no idea at a young age that it was offensive. And so I think as human beings, once we step outside of that bubble, which for a lot of us is college, college is that place to step out of that bubble and to start to see things from different perspectives and to start having conversations with people who think differently than you. So I get the emotional connection, but at the same time, you still have to evolve as a human being to understand that other people sitting across the table from you has just as much right to be humanized as anyone else. And for 500 years, we have been systematically been dehumanized for a purpose. Divide and conquer, manifest destiny. So this is just but one of the issues. And like I said in the movie, that really is true, is that everything is connected. It doesn't, and so some of the arguments I get, even from my own community, is there are bigger fish to fry. Why are you worrying about a mascot? And it's not about me. I grew up in my protective bubble. I grew up with loving parents who encouraged me to do well and to aspire to things that I didn't know I could do. So when I sit here or when I have conversations about anything about equity, it's for the young people. They still deserve a right to grow up and be proud of who they are. And while mascots, I don't feel affect me in a way, it doesn't affect me of my ability to be proud of who I am or where I come from. I also didn't grow up, with that being taught to me. So the reason that I stand up and the reason that I speak and the reason that I sit at all the tables that I do is because there's young people. There's young people who didn't grow up in that bubble. There's young people that grow up in really tough situations, emotionally, physically, poverty, whatever, and they deserve every opportunity to reach their level of success, that however they define it. I got off track.
Thank you. Oh, that was great.
Here you go.
Well, my initial response was, to me, was just a reflection of a superiority complex. A lot of Americans function with that, a superiority complex, meaning people like us or people with our skin color are better than people with your skin color. And so I thought, from my observations and research, that's not shocking. But I guess my initial response right after that was, okay, what do? They don't have much power socially or politically, so how can they fight the system? And so it immediately took me back to the civil rights movement, and it was like, if I were a Native American, and the way I would attack that system would be through boycott. And so I think at some point they need to get into the minds of the people in Washington, which, side note, I was like, wow, the capital of America has a football team with a racial slur on the helmet. To me, that's very symbolic. And so to think that you have a right to take the totality of a group of people and put it on the side of a football helmet, again, that's just a manifestation of superiority. And so I also was thinking, like, what other race in America, because we have literally every race in America situated here, what other race of people are used as a mascot? And I can't think of any. So that in and of itself shows that inherently people understand that you don't put groups of people or use them as mascots, but yet we're doing it here. So I think it's going to be important that you guys galvanize your voice, the Native Americans that are fighting against this. You have to galvanize your voice, become more charged politically, and just continue to motivate not only your own people, but also other races who are ignorant of. I just talked to a lady today. I was letting her know I was coming to do this panel, and I told her what the panel was about, and she was like, she never thought of that. And it was ironic she brought up Florida State, because she lived in Florida. So she brought up like, oh, I never even thought about that. So I think you got to keep it at the forefront of America's conscience until finally people wake up and get it.
I think for me, obviously there's tons of interconnecting issues with this, and I thought the film does a really good job of trying to weave those sort of disparate threads together. But for a theme that kind of jumps out is sort of a theme of resiliency with this that really comes up time and time again when you look at sort of Native peoples sort of dealing with so many different issues. And so as is often said, like, why this issue? Why not these other problems that are sort of pervasive among Indian country? And people are protesting and working on those as well. It's not like they're ignoring everything just to go after mascots. But you see that sort of intergenerational resiliency with that as well, that you have a court case that lasted 17 years. That one falls off, but the plaintiff there talks about how it was sort of somebody from a previous generation that sort of turned her onto it to get that, and then now you have a younger generation and community pushing forth a more recent sort of court case that recently just sort of dropped off. Now you have filmmakers sort of trying to bring it into consciousness. They just have such ongoing sort of tenacity and resiliency among Native peoples that it's just always incredible, because you can consider literally for 500 years of literally genocide and ethnocide in there, that you still have such a sort of a tenaciousness that comes with it. So, and then you look at the vibrancy, like sort of the thing that jumps out at me with the video beyond that is that Comic-Con. So just really the tremendous sort of creativity and sort of diversity of life among within Indian countries is phenomenal. So despite sort of literally hundreds of years of historical injustices, not only do you have a galvanization to continue to fight long drawn-out battles that seem to be completely uphill against billion-dollar industries, but you also have vibrant communities that are really just sort of exploring into every aspect of contemporary American life as well. And so I guess the positive light on this is that it really is such a tremendous, I guess, testimony of really the resiliency of human culture in there, and I'm always impressed when I see that sort of put forth like that.
I should have went third because he stole my answer. No, I'm kidding. I forgot to mention what I do. I work with the Indigenous Education Initiative at the Michigan Department of Education here in Lansing. Right now, I think, in regards to, my feelings about the documentary tonight, what can I say that hasn't been said by every advocate on that in the documentary tonight? Besides the fact that, when we talked about resiliency, there's a term that I always use from a Cree elder in Saskatchewan, from Saskatchewan, Canada. The term is, traditionally we were a contemporary people. Traditionally we were contemporary people. When I first heard that, I thought it was an oxymoron until I heard from the Cree elder himself who spoke that term. And it was about resiliency. It was about our ability to be contemporary no matter what year, no matter what generation. Our ability to roll with the punches, our ability to take the most evil things done to our people and survive it. In a contemporary sense, to find a contemporary power to even survive a traditional enemy, traditional oppression. When I think about all the advocates in this video tonight, they're demonstrating that. They're demonstrating the ability to have that cultural resilience, even in the face of defeat, what would be considered defeat in a court of law. That doesn't deter people like Amanda Blackhorse. It doesn't deter people, like Tara Hauska. It doesn't deter them because they have that contemporary context, a traditional context of what it means to be resilient, what it means to be indigenous. And where does that come from? People always say, how do you get back up? How do you get back up from, being knocked into the dirt? The dirt itself is what gets you up, because the cultural teachings, the indigenous DNA knowledge is in that dirt. It's where we regain our resiliency from the teachings from the earth. That is why when people say, particularly when they say, the term they always say is "get over it." We hear that used all the time. And again, don't you have something more important to do? Isn't it something more important that you Indians should be focusing on instead of a mascot? That goes back to being a multifaceted problem solver as an indigenous person. when I tell my students the same thing, is that you can't focus solely on being a water protector. You can't focus solely on being an advocate against use of racist mascots. You can't solely be focused on being an expert in culture or an expert in treaty right obligations. You can't focus solely on being just one of those. You have to be an expert in all of those. That's what makes you a multifaceted indigenous problem solver. That's where you get resiliency from. And I think everybody on a video tonight, they have that ability to be a multifaceted problem solver from an indigenous perspective. So when I think of resilience, that's how I think about it. I think about it from that perspective. So.
Thank you, Lynn. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask our panel tonight? Want to include you guys also?
I got a comment.
Can I get you the microphone? So,
Just as Mr. LaPointe was just saying about us being resilient and being able to fight forward, I'm talking about that we are Americans, and if we need to recognize what we've had to go through, all of us. And a black person gets pulled over just because he's black. Women are, especially women today, are being disparaged, and misogyny is, I'm ashamed of being a man. I think it's time that we all of us as Americans take a stand. I defended my country. I'm a veteran, and I would do it again, even though I know what happened. I'm Native American also. I know what happened to our people. I understand that. And it's time, especially with our political climate and situation that we have right now, it's time we take a stand and take America back and start being, I love this country. Because what happened to Native Americans, what happened to blacks, what happened to women, it could happen to you, anyone. So let's all stand up and fight. That's all I got to say. It's time we take America back. Like I said, I defended my country. I would do it again. I'm proud to be an American.
thank you, Randy. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to share? Mary.
I also talk whenever I'm given a chance. I grew up in a family that loved the Atlanta Braves. We're from Georgia, that was like super into it. And I've heard heard things before where people are saying that these mascots are offensive. And my family often thought what's the real harm? And then this movie mentioned that, if I recall it correctly, kids were being impacted. They did psychological tests, and there's the harm right there, and other aspects too. But I was wondering if maybe one of you guys could expand a bit more on this, because we always thought at worst it was mean, you know?
That's a really good question. So one of the things that I found along my journey that really helped me put things into perspective is you can be proud of your mascot. You go to a school, you're a team. So for instance, in high school, we have the Saranac Redskins in Michigan, and I live right by that. We have the Paw Paw. And we have to think about not only the students that go to those schools, but the schools that are playing those schools. And when they hold up their banners, they quickly showed it about Kansas City Chiefs, right? So the Redskins, it always goes back to a historical moment for the other team. We're going to send you back to, Trail of Tears #2. That is clearly a sign of ignorance of what the Trail of Tears is. And so you think about those students that go to those schools. Yes, they have to walk up and down the halls with those disparaging images, but they also are being attacked by the other school when they are showing their pride of how we're going to beat you on the football team or on the football field. So that was one of the things that stuck with me, and it brings it to a place where I think more people can understand that the impact without having a PhD in psychology or having to have all these, reading all these research, is that when you see yourself in an image where there's an arrow through your head or, you know, these really violent images, it really impacts that person's ability to be proud. And it made me really sad when you said you're really ashamed to be a man right now. I don't think anyone deserves to be ashamed of who they are at all, ever. And so we want to create a system, right? The education system is all about a safe space for our kids. These are not safe spaces for any kid.
Does anyone else have a comment? Dr. Fields?
Okay, I'll say something.
All right.
Well, I think you were speaking more on like the psychological impact of that symbolism on children. Yeah, to me, it just communicates inferiority. It communicates that my culture, my tradition, my values, and my norms are to be used as entertainment. And so symbolically, I could never say exactly how a child internalizes that, but I think it's it was kind of reflecting. I don't know if that was fake news, but they said 9 out of 10 Native Americans say that if they weren't bothered by it. To me, that sounds like internalized racism. That's kind of like, to kind of echo what you were saying, it's almost like when you were saying we had to take our country back, what I was hearing was psychologically, we need to realize this is our country, we deserve to be here, you're not doing us a favor, we shouldn't have to beg, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's psychologically, I think, obviously, if you're not offended, again, there's no other race in America who's on the side of a football helmet. If that doesn't offend you, that my race is the only race on the side of a football helmet, you've internalized some level of inferiority. And so, again, this is where the older, Nate, I was about to say old heads, but that's a black term. This is where you recondition the youth and you let them know that is not appropriate. You let them know that there's a systematic inferiorizing of your people. And so you need to stand up against it in whatever way possible. But you don't want that generation to go ahead and accept that, and 10 years, 20 years later, they're doing another poll, and 9 out of 10 haven't rose up against it.
All right. Dr. Carr?
I think you can probably expand that question a little more. So you focus on sort of the effect on individuals. I always, at least from my disciplinary perspective, I always want to look at sort of the role of structures. And so one of the things they talk about is sort of the impact even on policy as well. And so if you look at the overall effect on say, a population's psychology of that, as Dr. Fields has pointed out, there's really no other context that we see sort of use of caricatures like this as mascot imageries. And as the video kept repeatedly pointing out, that has a really a powerful dehumanizing effect. And what it does at a couple things is one, sort of denies sort of a full sort of humanity to Native peoples. And two, what it also does is it freezes sort of the Native identity at this moment in time, and that you don't permit them to be sort of contemporary peoples, even though they're traditionally contemporary, which is a great term for thinking about that. And that, in addition to impacting individuals and youth, that has a really profound impact upon policy in that, where the idea then, well, we're going to reroute a pipeline around this town because we're worried about their water supply, but we don't care about these people's water supply because they're less than sort of full members of that. And so you see sort of a lot of times policy implications really come out of this. And I think it was Phil Deloria that was really emphasizing that as well, is that becomes the interconnection of this. Which is that issues that a lot of times we want to compartmentalize things, which is a very white way to do things. But really a much more of an indigenous worldview would be looking at the interconnection between all of that, and that you really can't work on these issues, water rights or treaty rights or sovereignty rights, without dealing with sort of the imagery of that. And the way that plays out in discourses really has a very, very strong effect on that. So I always say that the problem that it goes both at the individual level and impact on individual kids, particularly growing up like that, but also has an extremely sort of damaging effect on sort of broader sort of society-wide discourses as well.
You took my answer again. Man, I'm going to switch seats. No, when I think about your question and I think about And it took me back to growing up on my reservation in South Dakota and playing football. And it was my first experience dealing with this issue. You know, on my reservation, you know, the next district over was a all-white town, and a very racist town. And there was always clashes, you know, with that town, with the people from that town. And those clashes, you know, spilled over to every aspect of the reservation. You know, they spilled over to the aspect of sports, high school sports on the reservation. It was really my first experience with understanding, you know, or experiencing why another race of people didn't like my people in the context of a game, you know, and how the other players, you know, looked at us, how we looked at them, you know, the sense of I don't know, almost that combative nature that you prepared yourself before even stepping foot on that field, because it was a combative nature, not in the context of sports and competition, but it was a combative nature in the fact that you know that these people didn't like you because of the color of your skin, and that's what drove your three-point stance into the offensive lineman in front of you. That's what drove your hit on a quarterback when you had a chance to. You know, it psychologically it affected us as young Native men from the reservation. Was how these other young men, our peers who were white, how they looked at us, and the assumption that we made that they all thought that way of us. You know, collectively, even as young Native men, we all assumed that they thought that way of us, and vice versa. And so when you have a sport like football that is supposed to be driven by competitiveness, being driven by these type of factors, these type of psychological factors, it impacts you, it imprints on you. You know, it imprinted on me to this day. Because now I remember maybe recently, as 10 years ago, coming across in the town of Rapid City, coming across one of those players I played against, and I remember stepping on his hand, because in a pile up, here was his hand. It was an opportunity for me to use my cleats to push into his hand on the football field. And that was the very first memory that popped into my head when I saw him all these years later, you know. And we recognized each other, and it was kind of you try to be an adult about things and you shake hands. But I look back onto, you know, how our relationship as competitors was dictated by the racial overtones, you know, of our existence. I think that is still true to this day, you know, on my reservation, maybe most reservations, when they play off-reservation football teams, and there's a racial factor involved, and there's mascot issues involved, you know, that push, that drive, you know, comes from a place that it shouldn't. You know, it comes from a place that it should come from, you know, the competitiveness. You know, it should come from school pride. It should come from things that we all want it to come from, you know, but when there's a mascot issue involved, it changes the whole playing field. You know, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Awesome, thank you. A question over here.
So it was really interesting for me to see in that documentary. My own knowledge is limited, but it was clear that there are some institutional differences in the NCAA, for example, has been fighting against the use of Native Americans in mascots, or at least in some cases. In North Dakota, I believe it was brought up. But then the NFL is clearly not very helpful in this case. What about other sports or other major institutions? Have other institutional groups played a role in this fight or taken sides on this kind of thing that any of you know of?
I know that most recently, you know, the Atlanta Braves had dropped the use of the Chief Wahoo mascot, or the shoulder patch. Well, not until next season, so they're still going to use it this season. And the thing I watched is the celebratory nature on Facebook. I watched the celebratory nature Native American journalists, you know, all celebrating the fact that this had taken place. It was hard for me to celebrate because for me it's a placating measure, you know, that a lot of professional sports teams take. You know, they'll take placating measures as opposed to just wholesale elimination of the mascot itself. They will give you bits and pieces to placate you. You know, we'll say, well, we'll drop this part of our mascot in order to make you feel better, because so it was disappointing for me to see the nature of celebration. You know, as I looked around at celebration, it's something to be celebrated, but it's a step. You know, it's not the end result that we're looking for. You know, to have a professional sports organization, you know, offer us tidbits, offer us crumbs, you know, as opposed to, you know, sitting down and having a full meal with us and making that change, a wholesale change. I may probably upset a lot of the my Native advocate brothers and sisters, but don't celebrate just yet.
You stole my answer this time. So institutionally, you see big differences between NCAA as a sort of essentially nominally a nonprofit entity and professional sports in here, but you see at least with NCAA as a nominally educational institution, it trickles down to the state level as well. I believe Michigan's High School Athletic Association has been putting pressure on their teams around the state to drop some of those mascot names as well. And it comes down to there's sort of context and nuance with everything as well. Particularly the way the NCAA sort of approaches it with sort of getting permission there. That when you think about sort of the categories of mascots, that there's a difference between Braves, Indians, the Washington sort of team name, and stuff like the Florida State Seminoles or the Central Michigan Chippewas. And in those cases, you have relationships between the educational institutions and the tribes themselves. And so that was attempted to be done in North Dakota's context as well, but obviously that didn't quite get consensus with that. But Central Michigan has a great relationship with the Saginaw Chippewa tribe. And so really you have an opportunity with organizations like the NCAA and the individual tribes themselves for creating very, very strong sort of collaborative things that benefits everybody in there. So I think institutionally you see that context able to have a lot of I think, productive discourse. It's just when you look at the professional landscape that you have oftentimes a lot more of those big reductive sort of mascots in here, and that does no effect but to dehumanize and stereotype people in here. And so that's, I think, where that struggle becomes a lot more. But then it plays into a lot of the sort of the hierarchies of power built into that. As a professional sort of sports owners and are used to sort of calling those shots. So one of the things in the video that stood out for me was just that sort of epistemological certainty that Dan Snyder has, that his idea of the name is it's an honoring type of thing in here, and that it was case closed for him. And so it didn't even dawn on him that he doesn't even have the legitimacy to decide that issue of what a name that's derogatory to somebody else actually means for them. Because he's as used to being wrapped in that position of power as essentially a rich white guy that owns a football team, that he has that sort of social location within American society that he feels obligated to some extent to be able to make those decisions on behalf of other people. So I think the attitudes between those institutions are a lot different because of that. You see that a lot more in a pro sports, whereas at the NCAA, which is an educational institution nominally, sort of really pushes forth to having those much more textured relationships.
I'll pass also.
Thank you.
Well, my first thought when I watched this movie, I thought about what if it was my race, Mexican, being portrayed wrong. There was a football team called the Beaners. As goofy as that sounds, it's super wrong when you think about it like that. And why people don't realize it is because people aren't feeling that discrimination directly. And to make people really understand what it feels like, you have to experience it. I never really thought of discrimination as a big problem until I've personally felt discriminated, you know? And so I feel that's what's going to cause a change is when you make these people know what it feels like, because they have to be impacted like that. And I think really how people can think about this is just put yourself in their shoes and just think, like, how would you feel if someone negatively portrayed you? And all these people just like thought it was fun and just thought nothing of it. Just think about that if you're a fan of this team, or, you know, just in that nature is what I'm trying to say.
Oh.
I'm tired, so we're gonna see how this goes. But essentially, personally, I'm a gay Jew. And I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, and it was not. I didn't know any other Jews. Definitely didn't know any other gay people. So I related a lot to what I saw, and what I kept hearing repeated again in the film as well as up here was, it's so stupid, it's so little, get over it, you know, whatever. It's just a joke is a really fun one that always happens, right? And the thing that I've always found fascinating is, if it's so little and stupid, then why the hell don't you just fucking change it? Like, why, if it is, because it's so inconvenient, it's their inconvenience weighed against your misery, you know, and like, so it's what's so interesting. It goes back to the power issue and how, you know, it's weighed that inconvenience is more important, right? And that's down to the misogyny issue, to, you know, racism, you name it. And I think that Andre really spoke to the core of it, where the way to address it is, at the end of the day, like, he definitely knows that it's bullshit. He knows that it's not right. And he being Snyder, right? That was the guy's name? Yeah. He absolutely knows it, but he has $1 bajillion, you know? He wants that money. It's a brand. That brand brings the money in, and the people who are tied to it are, you know, the ones that are bringing it. So the only way to change it for that particular one is to stop making it profitable. So I don't know how exactly you go about that, and I think that there have been measures that have been taken to do so, but policy is important, but I think public opinion and it all comes down to capitalism and money at the end of the day. So, you know, if it's not profitable for him to keep the name, then he's not going to keep it. So I guess the best way is to, personally, I came out to GVSU, and I actually had a culture clash, like a culture shock, because I had never been around. I guess it was just a very different idea of the world, and I had very different conversations, and it was usually like people telling me, you know, oh, you're not gay, boo, I'm trying to convince me I'm not, and I think I had a 3-hour conversation with one gentleman about it, and what it boils down to that I've learned is that it is that humanizing. It's the fact that, like, that's not the whole of the person that allows that to change, and so yeah, it needs to be exposure of the group to understanding that, okay, this person is someone that I care about. This is someone that I can identify. This is someone that is within my realm, and therefore it's part of my group of people. And so now I care, because it's something little and stupid, because like he said, it doesn't actually apply to them. You know, it doesn't matter to them. So why would it? But yeah, I'm gonna ramble more, but that's my opinion.
Something that I noticed after watching this the first time, and I've discussed with Mariah, is why is it that it's male mascots? And is it because they feel more powerful to dehumanize a native male?
I think that stems from having such a patriarchal system. I mean, from my perspective of my nation and my people, is women were the decision makers. Women held seats of protection and power. But that really clashed in 1492 when they all came from this male-dominated experience in real life situations. And I think that just carries over. I mean, why would you want, you know, you mentioned Grand Valley, they're the sailors. It's a man. There's no female out there. I mean, it took archaeologists to discover that Vikings really like sent their females to to war with them. So it just stems from a massive patriarchal system where women are less than. But we're not.
I think too, it's probably just the masculine variable of, I'm a guy, I don't want to have a woman on my helmet. Does that make sense? So it's most of the mascots are sports teams. So most men dominate sports or historically have. And so I think that's probably the reason is just, hey, we don't want a woman or whatever on the jersey. So that's my answer.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think you see a combination of both those sort of trends in there. Like, if you look at all the individuals in the video pushing that, it's women that's driving a lot of that conversation. You know, look at the recent election gains for Native Americans, Native American women that are getting into office in there. So I think that's very typical of really a difference in culture between an angle versus an indigenous perspective in there. But then wrapped up into that is really the inherent masculinity that sports culture has. And that it extends to really every mascot. So the one kind of context I think jumps out for that would be Louisville has the Cardinals is the team name, and so they refer to their female sports as the Lady Cardinals. Yet the mascot is a bright red cardinal, which is a male cardinal, not a female cardinal. And so, I mean, you see that same type of imagery. It pervades that patriarchal type of thing across really all sports. And so I think that's probably more the rationale for it. And
I have a question.
What they said.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to.
My question actually is for Lynn, who works at the state, Michigan. Wasn't at one point the state trying to hold back funding to local high schools who had derogatory mascots?
No comment. No, I'm kidding. No, the state board of education back in 2003 drafted a resolution to not so much to ban use of derogatory mascots, but as much to recommend to school districts that they not use disparaging mascots. But like any resolution didn't have a lot of teeth. That same resolution was again reauthorized back in 2010. Again, by a state board that didn't have the enforcement powers to go about to do that. And within the issue itself has been taken up by various administrators at state level, are not. It was unfortunately with the passing of our state superintendent back in a few months ago, earlier this year, that was cause that he was about to champion, was to utilize his leverage as a state superintendent to force districts to take a look at their use of mascots, and that was encouraging. Encouraging for us, encouraging for those out there who had been doing this work for a long time, who had been out there, in the trenches doing this work, unacknowledged. To finally have someone at the state level look into what can we do to further this along, what can we do to force a change if necessary, and it was encouraging. Unfortunately, unexpectedly, Superintendent Whiston passed away. So right now it's still kind of we're in a flux right now, because now we're waiting for the next superintendent to come on board. That process is going to take into the year, but what's encouraging, I think, from a state's perspective, is the new election. The State Board of Education, which had been deadlocked with 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, has now shifted to 4 Democrats and 2 Republicans in its power structure. So a lot of what kind of was sidelined by passing of a state superintendent, and I think can now have new life breathed into it. So I think there's going to be hopefully some changes along with the electoral changes that we've seen in the state. So
I think that's a really safe bet. if I may ask you a question, Mr. LaPointe, you had mentioned to me that you have a special connection with this film, actually, the Minnesota scene, actually. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Okay. Yeah, it was when we initially started speaking about me coming here and how many thousands of dollars I was gonna get paid. No, I'm kidding.
Wait, what?
Sorry, I forgot. Didn't tell him. No, I was at the University of Minnesota. When a lot of this footage was taken. And for me, it was. I've been a Minnesota Vikings fan all my life. I've been an NFL fan growing up. And you grew up on a reservation in South Dakota, either you're Pine Ridge or South Dakota, Pine Ridge or Rosebud. You're geographically located right between Denver and Minneapolis. And so as a kid, you grow up either you're a Viking or you're a Bronco. And every Sunday we had the two stations we got on TV. One of them was CBS, and one was ABC. And you got either AFC or NFC. For us, it was always watching the Vikings games. And with my father, who was an NFL fan. And my brothers who were NFL fans. We all grew up, and we all weren't Minnesota Viking fans. My older brother, Dwayne, to this day is a diehard, staunch Washington Redskin fan. And this is long before I would ever come into this knowledge about this issue, and he still is to this day. But fast forward to the fact that I would eventually move to go on and study at and work at the University of Minnesota. When this movement came to Minnesota, it had always been there through the American Indian movement and other organizations in the Twin Cities. But that particular day, when the Redskins came to town and played the Vikings, Minnesota's new stadium was under construction. So they played at the University of Minnesota Stadium, and so to see these thousands of people come together, and just kind of swarm all over the campus, was I couldn't understand why my lunch break turned into a 6-hour lunch break. Leaving my office and joining everybody at the stadium. So I was kind of watching some of the video to see if I can see myself. I saw some of my nephews, so I'll get to tell them that I saw them in a video with their drum group. But I think it was I had read an article before I came here too about the what role the state of Minnesota played in this whole mascot issue. It was really the first time I saw an organized response to the mascot issue. When I was my very first opportunity in Minnesota was to be involved in the Grand Rapids, Minnesota School District, who were in the process of changing their name. And I was asked to be part of a council to travel to Grand Rapids to meet with the school board. And when I got there, I thought it would bring me other youth, other tribal youth. Instead, I was part of a really a multi-ethnic group of educators, and I was the only American Indian, and I was 20 and 30 years younger than everybody else, addressing this issue. And I'm a res boy from Rosebud, South Dakota, fresh from the res out in Minnesota, and I remember feeling out of place. I remember feeling that I wasn't on par with everybody there and all of the degrees and all their all their passed out business cards. I had no business card to pass out. But I'd said my piece, and after I left and I traveled home to South Dakota, I still felt inadequate. I didn't feel like I had the educational capacity to address this issue for a district who was looking for answers. I was just simply a former football player from a reservation who also had an opinion. And so I went home and I asked probably my greatest mentor, was my mom. And I said, did I even make a dent? Did I do anything of purpose? Did I, being with all these super intelligent people, who had all the answers, and I kind of sat there like a bump on a log. And she said, you were there. You have to, she said, you have to think about it in the context of an indigenous mother, or the way she said it is Lakota Ia, is you were there in the context of the fact that you have to look at these kind of things like an Indian mother does. An Indian mother has to solve many problems. An Indian mother has to incorporate, things new to her, and learn how to solve them if she's going to protect her children, protect her family. She said, if you're going to do this work, if you're going to address these kinds of issues, she said, you have to think like an Indian woman. You have to think like your mom, So, to this day, I think like my mom, If I didn't, I'd be in trouble. So.
Thank you, Lynn. Does anyone else have any questions? Alrighty.
Thank you. How you doing? My name is Juan Reyes. I have a question. What message do you believe America is sending by naming helicopters as support and also cause destruction, Tomahawk and Gray Eagles, missiles named after natives, and then missions to take out terrorist leaders such as Operation Geronimo? Is that honor? Is that respect to you guys?
Wow.
Give a Lakota a mic. All right. Get your pillows. Fill in. I've always kind of been a pet peeve of mine to see to watch many of our people really feel honored by that. I watched some of my peers and even some of the people I looked up to back in South Dakota when the U.S. Army rolled out their new Lakota helicopter and rolled it out. Had this big grand opening event at Crazy Horse Mountain in the Black Hills of South Dakota, where they had all these Indians in their war bonnets and all these drums, and all these spiritual leaders came to Crazy Horse Mountain, and the Army flew in these brand new Lakota helicopters, these light helicopters, flew them into Crazy Horse and landed in a parking lot, and drums, and people were singing with drums and honor songs, and people were getting star quilts wrapped around them, and it was exactly what you said. There was no honor in it. There was no honor in watching, watching my people. And I throw everybody under the bus here, but watching some of my people who I looked up to celebrate the fact that there was a helicopter named after him, and the reasoning behind it was, well, it's not a helicopter of war. This Lakota helicopter is a light helicopter. It's going to be used for medical transport. It was kind of trying to justify the fact that they were naming this helicopter after our people. It started a great debate within our reservation and amongst our people when we talked about how do the Apache people feel when the AH-64 Apache, one of the deadliest attack helicopters in the fleet, is used to take lives of other brown people abroad. How do we feel when all of these weapons of war take these names of proud people? That should be an internal debate, I think, not just with us as Native people, but I think it should be, an internal debate, or a debate we have with our brothers and sisters in Central and South America, where a lot of these equipment was used to further the colonization of these communities. It still goes on today. I think that it's high time that the people here sit down with the people who are the victims of this type of equipment, and utilize this, I think, as an opportunity to address this issue and say, stop naming them after our people, stop naming after our chiefs, stop naming after start naming after your chiefs. Why not the AH-64 Washingtons? Or the AH-64 Teddy Roosevelts. You can really turn this around, but it's demeaning and it's dehumanizing, and but it's been accepted for so long and for so many wars that a lot of our people are placated. A lot of our people will just sit by and let it happen, or celebrate it. To this day, the image of that that Lakota helicopter pilot at Crazy Horse getting out of the helicopter and coming over to the the stand in which there was a drum group and getting a star quilt wrapped around him. I said, that still haunts me to this day. You know, that still haunts me to see my own people do that and celebrate that. I don't know if that answers your question, but for me, it's you know, like you said, there are so many weapons of war throughout the years that have been named after tribes. You know, the Chinook, and you know, when people talk about the Chinook, well, it's a transport helicopter, so it's okay. You know, no, you can't take a weapon of war and say, well, one's used to treat the victims of that war, and one's used to inflict casualties of that war. So it's I don't know, it doesn't make any sense to me.
I think they honestly think that they're honoring. I think they name them in the idea of what it is to be Native. It's the Hollywood version of being Indian versus the reality of being Native in today's contemporary existence. And then you want to honor us as a people, then honor our treaties. Make sure our reservations have clean water. Make sure that we are being protected from these man camps when they come in. Make sure that when we have a missing or murdered Indigenous woman, that there is someone out there looking for them. That's how you honor an entire population. Throwing us a name, giving us a mascot, that's not honoring. Like, he uses the word placates. It is. It's their idea of doing what they think is just. I think when you want to honor somebody, you do something for them that's going to help us currently, the last 7 generations, the next 7 generations. That's how you honor a people. When our government constantly strips us of our rights to be human on a daily combative basis, and then then they call it honoring. How many of those people looked completely ridiculous and said that this is an honor? I was off the topic, but at a food sovereignty conference, and a woman was saying they spend more time in protecting our wild rice than they do protecting the people. So we've put more value on something that's insignificant than we do our human beings. We have, our reservations are, they're third world existence, some of them. And we here in Michigan, we have a unique existence where we're surrounded by populated city and governments and municipalities. But when you look at other reservations, they have huge swaths of land. The government signed these treaties, and a lot of times we get, oh, that treaty was written so long ago. Who cares? You know what else was written a long time ago? The Constitution of the United States. And so we can't discredit something because of its age. And when it's just so ridiculous to think that they're honestly feeling like they're honoring us. I sat at a school board meeting at Saranac. I gathered a lot of my Native people, my Native friends, and we went out to the school board because the mascot issue is, I'm sorry, I keep looking at you, but you're the one that asked the question. I've kind of like honed in on you. So we went, I gathered all of my support system because being out in where I live, I'm the only Native, so I thought. So I gathered my family and my friends, and we went to the school board meeting, and their long time, passionate, emotional connection to this word is very evident, and they did it in such a disrespectful manner. So at the same time, they're saying, we're honoring you. This guy called me an apple. Like, I'm not aware of anyone else understands the full meaning of the word when you call an Indian an apple. That means you are red on the outside, but you're white on the inside. So it's kind of like a double jab. He's telling me he's honoring me and we're respecting you, but it's a few bad apples. That was one of the first times I actually had been in a situation where it's been verbalized. Your ignorance, your convoluted idea of honoring and respect in such an ugly manner the text that she got, all the cuss words and all these things, these people are putting more value on this image than they are an actual human being. So these helicopters and these missions, part of me wants to say that, you know, we gave them such a hard time for a couple hundred years that we do have this perceived strength and warrior, you know, that they want that to be this power that takes them into battle. And if that's the case, then own it. Be honest. But don't say it's to honor us, because honoring us would be making sure our men, women, and children for the last 7 generations and the next 7 generations would be protected and taken care of.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? I get one.
You go.
I know they touched on it a bit in the film, but pretty much my question is, why do you think the N-word and the R-word are seen and treated differently in society nowadays? I feel like the civil rights movement and the quantity of population of Native Americans and just putting the R-word on a sports team, it all played like a small factor in it to why there's such a huge difference to how we treat both words. So pretty much, why do you think they're treated so differently?
I think from an analytical perspective, part of it comes down to what a lot of the attempts with Native American imagery was for, which is to disappear them entirely, to again freeze them at moments in time. And so what you do then is if you think about it as the mythologizing for a country that there's indigenous peoples here that have such deep attachment to the land that goes back like thousands and thousands of years, and you essentially have foreign invaders colonizing somebody else's land and territories. How do you legitimize appropriating somebody else's territory? Well, the easiest way is through symbols and rhetoric and that to essentially disappear them. And so freeze them as sort of a historical relic. And again, you see that all the time in terms of when we talk to people. And so I teach a Native cultures course, and that's one of the first discussion things we have is I ask my students, like, what do you know about Native peoples? And invariably, it's just, that's what happened in the first chapter of my American history textbook, and then they disappear in here. And so the use of that word in that sort of contemporary sense is all part of the, I guess, the power structures for why the word is in place in the first place, which is to really to completely ignore the presence of indigenous peoples in here, even though they're very much alive and contemporary and in here. Whereas the historical relationship with African Americans is much, much different in there, and that there's always been that sort of relationship where it's been sort of almost 2 parallel sort of histories within American society. And obviously, Andre can talk about this a lot more, but the idea then that sort of you have this almost 2-tiered strata within American society and try to maintain that sort of racial hierarchy in American society. And so because that struggle gets foregrounded in much more of a contemporary sense, I think the struggle over the N-word as a symbol happens much, much quicker. Whereas I think for most people, they just want to sort of forget about or just ignore Native peoples in general. So the struggle over the R-word has a much different sort of historical connotation because of what it's actually being used for. In one sense, it's being used to disappear. In another context, it's used to subordinate in a contemporary sense in here. So you see the words treated different because of that. It's a good question.
Yeah, I think that I think about the issue of cultural dominance. You know, what culture is the most dominant? And it's not a circular context of cultures being equal. You know, it's that lineal context of, you know, my culture is first, your culture is second, your culture is third. And when you have that cultural dominance that drives your society, you know, when you have one culture believing that they're more dominant than the next culture, and the next culture after that, you know, they get to write the rules. They get to, or I think they do. You know, so when you think of an R word, You know, when you think of the N-word, you know, that is two different cultures, with one perceiving themselves as stronger or better than the other. But that was only two cultures. There are countless other cultures in our society, our American society, that suffer the same type of consequence and the same type of, when I think about the disability culture, you know, people with disabilities, you have to deal with the R word. They have their own R word, you know, that they get called, you know, and they have to deal with that in the same context that we deal with our R word. You know, it is a slander. It's derogatory in every sense of the word. So when I look at cultures and I think about invisible cultures, you know, I think one of the most invisible cultures in our society is the disability culture, and the R word that they have to deal with, because we don't see them as a culture. But when you get to know the disability culture, you see its rich vibrancy and its diversity. And then you realize that the R word that gets applied to them is just as offensive as the R word that gets applied to us, or the N word that gets applied to the African American community. That in itself should open your eyes to really the other cultures that are out there, you know, and the types of words that, you know, are used to demean and to put you in your place, as it were, and to say that our culture is more dominant than yours because we get to call you this, we get to call you that, when you have a culture that is confident enough in its own dysfunction to say that we get to come up with the words for you, we get to come up with how we see you and how we demean you. That is a cultural war that has been played out for far too long now, I think.
So I guess a person's level of mistreatment will only go as far as you let it. And so I think historically, Black Americans, we just haven't put up with it. And so I think the reason why they're treated so much different is because of the reaction that it brings out of us. So for instance, the stadium where they play football, that would have been burnt down because we would have responded and said it's not going to go down like this, and we would have kept responding until change was made. So until, again, Native Americans bring their voices together and say no more, they won't be treated equally. And so I think it's just you have to intensify your responses, but you guys also got to just agree. Like the 9 out of 10 that say it doesn't matter, you guys need to indoctrinate them to let them know that that's not cool, and we need to stick together and we need to say something until change comes. So it needs to be that when you hear the R word, it's just as, it draws the same social reaction as the N word. So until that happens, they won't be treated the same.
Yeah, I think that also there's complacency, you know, in every culture. There's complacency in being offended by something or not, you know. And watching this video, watching these African brothers with their Washington Redskins gear, you know, telling other African brothers and telling Native brothers and sisters that it's not offensive, you know. We have them in every culture. You know, in the Lakota culture, we call them loaf around the forts. You know, you loaf around the fort of the army, and you wait for handouts, and you appease them, and you do whatever you have to do. You know, and every culture has a context. You know, has a word for those type of people amongst our culture who sell out. You know, I know I can call my brother a sellout for wearing his Washington Redskins gear. You know. But what kind of context do we, or what kind of example are we setting within our families to all of a sudden go to war with one another within a family to say that I'm right and you're wrong? You know, for me as a Lakota, I have the greatest respect for my elder brothers, you know, and so I have to tread carefully when I talk to my brother about this issue, you know, because I don't want to offend him. You know, I have to respect him, and so I have to, you know, really, you know, be careful what words I use within my own family and what to call them. And my nephew proudly wears his Redskin gear every day, and it's on his Facebook post, you know. Every day I want to tear into him on Facebook, but every day I don't. until the opportunity arises in which I can sit with him and talk with him, because he's a man in his own right, a young Lakota man. So we have to deal with the fact that we're not all on the same page within a culture. We're not all on the same page. We're not all of the same opinion. We have mitigating circumstances that really I'm the youngest of 12 in my family. So my opinion as the youngest differs from my oldest brother, who is the oldest, who is the Redskin fan. I'm the first generation not to go to boarding school. He's the first person in my family to have went through boarding school. And so our life experiences are very distinct from one another. And so taking those into consideration, I think about my Afro-American brothers and sisters, my colleagues who are on the same page with me, who are not on the same page as the ones we've seen in the video tonight. That as a question, I think that has to be asked of ourselves, and it has to be a debate we have to have with ourselves. Is how can we not be on the same page? In attempting to do the work at the department at the state level, it was confusing for a lot of the state officials when a lot of our Native people were on the same page in the educational realm on this issue, around the issue of mascots. They were confused by that. It was genuine confusion when they said, "I thought all of you guys were on the same page on this mascot issue." And you looked at the room of the Native people in that room, and you can see generational differences of just those Native people in that room. And that's what contributed to the fact that we were all not on the same page. So we have to do a lot more work within our own communities to really, before we can bring that unified voice and say, we all are on the same page on this. And it's going to take that collective to really make the change. And it's a generational issue, I think, amongst Native people. And there's a complacency because that's what made you a good Indian. Is if you were complacent, you were given better opportunities if you were that good Indian. If you or that loafer on the fort, if you appeased your oppressor. That's what got you farther along in life. That's what
Amen.
I think. That's what our issue is. It isn't an issue that we all have to stand up and unify and fight and for me, watching the video tonight, the irony of RFK Stadium. If Robert F. Kennedy was alive and watching this, what would he do today? And what would his opinion be? It's almost equivalent of what would Jesus do? What would RFK do? Watching all these people of color wearing Washington Redskins gear walking into that stadium. RFK is closed now, but I have to think that way. I have to think what would our leaders think of the way we are today. We have to think that way too. I think as indigenous nations, what would our tribal leaders think of us today? Being divided, and there is division. So,
I guess I just wanted to bring up the survey that was done in the video. 9 out of 10 Natives. If anyone knows anything about statistics, a national sample size of 500 people does not equal 1% or 2% of the population that we are. I mean, it was a very faulty survey. It was small, and so if anyone knows about statistics, your N sample is huge in validating your results. And that was done that way, right? So everyone that walks out of this room can go home and feel all nice and comfortable and saying, oh, well, 9 out of 10 Natives, they don't care. What everything we do as Native people to fight against colonialism and in our process of decolonizing is putting people in an uncomfortable position. They have to rethink of their own institutionalization as well as ours. We've all been institutionalized to stand for the national anthem, to pledge allegiance to the flag. That is indoctrinating you to believe the next step that you get fed in your K through 12 experience. I love speaking at colleges because colleges are the pinnacle of critical thinking. It gets you to, this is a very diverse university or college. You don't find that in other colleges. So really revel in the moments that you have being in a diverse population, having conversations, because I think the only thing that is going to make some of these issues, not just the mascot issue, but every one of our other issues better, is evolving through dialogue, evolving through conversations, and education. I love the fact that you invited Lynn here because our education system is set up to keep us as a historical piece. It's very easy to use the R word. It's very easy to use Atlanta Braves because we're a historical spot and a fly on the wall, whatever. We're taught as a very historical people. So we don't exist today. So it's very easy to have this ethnocentric, perspective. We don't exist. So it has to change through K through 12 education system. We have to get rid of Native American Heritage Month. We have to get rid of African American Heritage Month. We have to get rid of all of these months because we exist 12 months out of the year. We should be, when you put us in a month, you are saying we're less than the 12-month education system. We're less than. You're already indoctrinated into believing that we're dehumanized and less than. So this will, November is always a busy month for me. I don't like it. I don't only exist in November. We are more than just a month in a 12-month series. We need to be in every level of social studies, science, history, all of these English. It's so easy to teach English by reading a Native American author. It's so easy to interject all these things. Lynn knows that there's a group trying to push and mandate top-down changes in K through 12 education system. But we need to stop doing all of these things in a month. I don't even remember what the question is.
At least one in July.
Oh, yeah, right. I thought about that on the way here. We get the crappiest month.
Well, we're moving on to 1/2 now, so I want to conclude the panel, but I want to thank you all so much for sharing generously of your time. And if we could give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. We actually have some gifts here for our panelists.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, if you think about from a collegiate, we're the shortest because we have Christmas break or Thanksgiving.
And I want to thank all of you for coming out as well. I know the weather's pretty crappy out there, but
Thank you.
yeah, thank you very much.